Funky, I'd sort of like for you to explain to me why you think, and I'd actually like three, if you can come up with three. Three reasons for why you like Clay Jordan. Ugh, I say stuff every day. That's all I gotta say. I asked for three reasons why. Well, you're not gonna get three. You don't understand, because I can tell right now there's no way in the world to satisfy your answer. So I try. Mark Burnett had some balls to put this guy on primetime television. A 5'5" balding, glasses-wearing Southerner, a recently bankrupt restaurateur from Monroe, Louisiana, someone who's not going to play the dummy with a sharp, dry tongue that'll cut anyone who gets under his thin, easily irritable skin. Clay on the surface feels like one of the weirdest picks for a reality television show, and maybe the most unlikely person to get a hair away from winning. Like, how the fuck do we get an entire season of Clay motherfucking Jordan, and he's a vote away from winning the ultimate game? But, like he says, he knows he's a diamond in the rough, and as Brian will come to admit, there's a lot more spunk in this little man than what initially meets the eye, in more ways than one. Someone so uniquely themselves has such an intriguing way he phrases his thoughts, and a personality unlike anything I've ever really seen represented in mainstream media. He is someone who makes every character better by interacting with them, and the way he reacts to them, and how they react to him. Clay's journey to the final two is one of my favorites and really illuminates many of the aspects I love about reality television. To start, Clay is just so naturally easy to make fun of. Like, come on, just look at him. The show gives us plenty of ammunition to make us laugh at him and think down on him. And, aside from being the last pick for a tribe, we also get that great confessional from Penny, immediately saying that Sukjai has the four best looking guys in our tribe, and then the other four that are sitting over there. And it immediately cuts to this really unflattering shot of Clay. His stature is immediately belittled as Ted easily sweeps Clay off his feet and carries him into the cave before they, roll in excitement on the floor of the cave. Maybe so excited they peed a little. He's so easily manhandled. It's best remembered by the attack zone challenge where Rob grabs Clay's neck and throws him into the water. Fucking hilarious. But was that really necessary? Rob is like a foot taller than Clay. Whiny baby. Backwoods hick. Did you hear him? Yo, yo, yo! Screaming at me. I want to spit in his face. Gandia has many good jabs at Clay too. And I love her nicknames for Ted and Clay. Frickin' Frack, Mud and Jeff, Fat Albert and Moo Cow. But none of that would mean shit if we weren't given ample ammunition to judge Clay. He is one mean old man, and many of his put-downs can feel extra spiteful, and although he has ammunition for most everyone on the season, his comments can be viewed through the lenses of sexism and or racism. And, I do think the show wants us to look between the lines, especially considering the ass-whooping he's given at Final Tribal Council. He puts Helen's seriousness down by likening her to an encyclopedia. You only open it, there ain't nothing fun to read. You only open it when you need information. He shows a lack of sympathy in how fed up he is with Jan. No shit, Sherlock. And her emotions regarding the animals that have died around the camp. He laments Penny's futile attempts at integrating herself within the Chewigao majority, saying she is a cute, sweet little girl. She thinks her looks and her little talent can get whatever she wants out of men. Well, I'm 46. She ain't getting shit from this one. She has tried to butter me up, she's tried to butter Brian up, and she has tried to butter Ted up. And every time she starts on one of us, we all just kind of cut our eyes and giggle like, yeah, there's a little bit more of that butter that's not working. We can often see where Clay is coming from. Even if the semantics feel yucky at times, he ultimately has the correct read on how the game is playing out. I often call Clay the best Survivor player that has no shot in hell at ever winning Survivor. Like, how the fuck did this guy ever win a jury vote? Whether the reasonings are fair or not, whether they're unfair stereotypes he can't break, does anyone really want to say they lost Survivor, the ultimate game, to Clay motherfucking Jordan? A guy who looks and acts so functionally useless, whose natural personality is that explosive and dry, and hell, I guess there are 3 people who were willing to write his name down and hold it up to a camera, say they were outplayed by the 5-foot assassin. We see early on how good he is as a social player. Clay, Brian, and Ted, they all do this really good job in those early Chewy-Gon scenes of instilling a positive, supportive, family-like mentality to the tribe, which is really important to those early stages of the game. I always really like the scenes where Clay comforts Gandia when she's crying after she royally blows that first immunity challenge for Chewy-Gon. We see Clay, he is an active player, always being in the know and having an active voice on where the votes are headed. He is the one who figures out how to win the clutch 21 Flags final tribal immunity that Chewy-Gon desperately needed to win. And come the time of the fake merge, Clay is the one who gets Xi'an to spill her guts to him and realizes that that's the crack that they need to get her to flip to the majority alliance. I know Xi'an might not be the hardest person to outplay, but he is the one that makes those initial inroads, and we see him, Ted, and Brian successfully convince her to flip. And once they finally have the actual real merge, the only real thing standing in the way of a Chewy-Gon winning Survivor is an individual immunity streak from Ken. And who's the one who beat Ken in a one-on-one final round of an immunity challenge? Clay the Slay Jordan. Man, he whoops Ken's ass in a dominating victory and puts his ass on the jury to vote for Clay. Speaking of, he expertly courts Penny and, by extension, those younger Sukjai votes. Those Sukjai jury votes, He builds relationships with them and convinces them to vote for Ted at the Merged Tribal Council, effectively straining the relationship between the Sukjai and Ted, and thus guaranteeing Ted's loyalty. He also strains the seemingly close-knit relationship between Penny and Jake, much to Jake's heartbreak. Everybody that's asked me who's going to be in the Final Four, I kick out a person and put in their name. I've done it with everybody up here. I'm going to continue to do it. And if they don't think I'm not, that would be real damn stupid for Clay to say, Penny, you're not in the Final Four, and put her totally against me. I got to put her ass on the jury to vote for Clay. When it's time for Chewy-Gon to cannibalize, they cannibalize in the order he wants, the one that'll leave him with the best chance at winning a jury vote. He and Brian do a total snow job on both Jan and Helen, convincing them to vote the other one off without saying anything to each other. We get this moment of Brian pondering, what am I going to tell Helen if I'm going to? To which Clay responds, it's going to pop up her name 3 times and she'll get the message, for sure then. Reaffirming to Brian that he shouldn't be honest with Helen. A move that will create animosity and betrayal between Brian and Helen and benefits Clay's chances of winning. It gets Brian's hands bloody too because as Clay reminds us, they've got to vote for somebody. He's a fairly strategically sound player. This was a very close jury vote. Those don't happen by accident, really. And if Helen is to be believed, she was heavily contemplating voting for Clay out of retribution for Brian's betrayal. Even in the live finale, she says she changed her mind on the plane ride home. And there are very few people who talk about the game in a way that is as engaging and as insightful as Clay. The cadence and delivery and the choice of words and phrases is so unlike anyone who I've ever seen on television. Clay's laziness is characterized really well throughout the season, as we are often presented with shots of him sleeping, snoring, and lounging around. The one time we see him on a water run, he and Ted fail miserably at swimming. He brings golf clubs as his luxury item, and we often get scenes of the men playing with them juxtaposed with the women cooking and tending to camp life chores. Clay's laziness, paired with his lack of obvious physical strength like Big Ted, is a big reason why Gandia and Jan target him at the tribal council post-Grindgate. Man, he is pissed off at Jake and feels personally offended when Jake implies he has one of the better work ethics around camp. I wonder why Clay feels so offended by Jake's comment. And then Clay goes around bemoaning and belittling Jake's Roy Rogers tales as he parodies them by saying, hey, I'm just a good old mountain man that goes out and kills them elk and falls down the mountains and wrestles grizzlies and I fight off men with alligators. With a cut to Magilla, the monkey, yawning during the story. Such rich characterization. He preemptively sabotages any chance of Jake to make any motion in the post-merge, dubbing him Jake the Snake, even though Jake has really done nothing to fit that allegation. It seems as if Jake is the man Clay sees himself as, but in reality isn't. And that makes Clay's jealousy seep through every scene they share, as Clay comments that Jake's Mouth is definitely overloaded his butt. We also get one of my favorite insane subplots. Clay Jordan's love of ass. A real ass man, ahead of his time. The rest of the nation is always playing catch up with the dirty South. They really got this perverted, dirty old man. First of all, butt and ass are two of Clay's favorite words anyways, as his language is littered with those words. He describes the Chewy Gal doll as big as your ass when Big Ted inquires. And when the two tribes start cohabitating, Clay is to remind myself I know what my wife looks like, as he marvels at Aaron's rockin' racehorse. In one moment, he admires the campfire making Aaron's ass twinkle and glisten, which, funny enough, reminds him of his own wife's butt as he goes on to excitedly tell the others how much he loves his wife's ass. At least on the show, this doesn't seem to be offensive to anyone, as they all seem to take it in good stride. Aaron's a neat girl, and isn't she a boobaloo? Which is one of the most deep down South ass things I've ever heard. Hell, the young women on the jury seem to take Clay and seem to like him, and both vote for him at the end. And Pervy ass Clay was not ashamed to sneak a peek even at his tribe mate's wife, as Clay is way more excited to see Cece than Brian is. She's a fox, and I'm gonna tell you, she's a fine-looking woman, and buddy, she's fit for the bikinis, I'm gonna tell you. He even compliments the elephant's ass that he and Brian ride on the reward. And Clay Jordan is a fucking menace, dog. Although I do find Clay mostly hilarious, there are moments where that hilarity can be surpassed by disgust. And the show wants you to think that too. Of course, the barrage of moments where Clay laughs at Brian's sexist comments and jokes, and even none of Brian's are ever really even funny. And then the comments made in regard to Gandia, such as in after the Grindgate incident, during Gandia's, loud, for lack of better words, crash out. Clay comments that Gandia gonna go down the beach, cry and holler and carry on. My 2-year-old did that one time. I whooped its ass and put it back in bed. Which is, quite frankly, just one of the most insane things I've ever heard uttered on fucking television. Like, god damn, that's cold-blooded. And of course, this is reality television, so who knows where in the sequence of events this confessional took place and what info did Clay know, but god damn. It especially doesn't look pretty when later, seemingly after Gandhi and Jan switched their voting plans from Ted to Clay, he reveals that, when I first saw her, I said, this is a problem woman. I was hoping she wasn't going to be on my tribe. I saw a lot of trouble with Gandia. When I first saw her, that's just the way I had her pegged. And then, after we got out here, I thought, maybe I was wrong. But I was a little bit wrong. But nutty buddy, did the blood come to the forefront. Then it cuts to another confessional where Clay says, do I feel sorry for Gandia? Hell no. I'm ready to get her ass back into Denver as quick as possible. If they can get a fast jet here, she needs to get on it and get the hell out of here for my sake. And you can read into these comments. And the show has the artistic right to place the confessionals in whatever order and context they feel is best needed for the story. The laughs get complicated, which really can describe the whole season, as I do find this to be a pretty funny season, even when it gets dark. The cast is just that rich, and for as much of an asshole as Clay is, there's a cunning charm to it. As we see, even the people he beefs with will get a kick out of his antics on occasion. Sometimes he can do the lovable curmudgeon. That's how Clay do, as Gandhi affectionately puts it. These pay off really well when we get to Final Tribal Council and Ted scorches the earth with his speech. After lamenting Brian for selling him lemons in the form of his friendship, the understanding of cultural diversity, in his word, Ted lets it go on Clay. Clay, you on the other hand, you sit there only because you rode the coattail of Brian, and I really, really did overestimate you. You're nothing more than an ignorant southern redneck hillbilly. And then he drops the atomic bomb. My question to you is, how do you define a racist person? Which Clay immediately sees as accusatory and acts frankly shocked at the accusation, to which he vehemently denies, before giving the outdated and nowadays pretty rightfully and fairly criticized response of, I think a racist person is anyone that tries to belittle the other race, whether it's white, black, brown, pink, or purple, or whatever. I've heard a fair amount of stories revolving around the context of this question, ranging from Helen hearing Clay say a slur and telling Ted, from Brian slandering Clay, maybe as a defense mechanism against Brian's own failed play using racism as a bonding tool for Ken. And the show does show how Brian will play the grapevine game and subtly manipulate heated, sensitive, and taboo situations in his own favor, and, damn near any other explanation in between. I don't know. And don't think there's ever been an answer that the cast agrees upon. But the show gives us enough ammunition where making this jump seems completely plausible. And to conclude, Ted asks why Clay is worthy of his jury vote, to which Clay simply replies, I was fair with Ted. To which Ted then points the question to the other finalist, Brian, is that true? To which Brian simply replies, no. And shit, it is a chilling scene. One of Survivor's most intense, and my stomach turns thinking of how uncomfortable that speech is. What a hell of a jury speech. One of the best in the franchise. If tribal council is the place where you atone for your actions, Clay is in purgatory feeling the heat of hell below him. And speaking of, then we get to Helen's speech, which is the one that is usually singled out from the season, and for mighty good reason. Everyone remembers the Brian-oriented segment of the speech, but the Clay parts are just as venomous. Echoing a similar sentiment to Ted, she says, Clay, it doesn't surprise me from you. You lived up to exactly what I thought you were going to be the whole time out here. Then she goes in on Brian for like an hour before finishing out with Clay, where she asks him for 3 reasons of how you contributed to 8 people having to survive. To which, he hastily replies, I do stuff every day. Do a little bit every day. That's all I got. And when Helen reminds him that she asked for 3 reasons, but he cuts her off before she even gets a chance to sink in her claws like she did for Brian. Helen, you don't understand, because I can tell you right now, there's no way in the world to satisfy your answer. So I try. And the music swells as Clay has this clenched, tortured, exhausted, beaten and defeated look on his face. You see his unflattering old man neckbeard growing because he's so damn short he has to look up at everyone talking to him. The flames of the fire reflecting off his fucking glasses. Chills. It unsettles me every time I watch that scene. Not even putting up a front, it's been so intense he can't even put on a nice face and try to come up with something. He knows he can be a lazy son of a bitch and doesn't even want to flop around like a fish begging for forgiveness like Brian just did to Helen. What a way to end a tribal council. And speaking of fire, look at the ways fire is used throughout the season. We see it reflected off of Clay's glasses many times throughout the season, especially at Tribal Council. We see it in those opening intros too, as the likes of Brian, Ted, the She-Devil, they all have their cast photos engulfed in flames. It's almost like the show is trying to tell us something. And those symmetries between Brian and Clay are some of the richest in the franchise between any 2 finalists. In many, many ways, they really are the same player. They both prioritize their own position in the game over all else. They are fiercely determined to make it to the end under any means necessary. Brian says, Clay's played the game very similar to me, so I'm not so sure of how the votes are going to go. And this recurring theme of the season is how Brian tricks everyone of his high expectation and good reputation that he's built. While, on the other hand, Clay has lived up to the low expectation that others assume of him. They all know Clay is the type of person who will stab someone in the back for $1 million and justify it later. You decide what's more damning. The evil that you know, or the evil you don't. Earlier in the season, Clay laments about the big fuss members of the tribe make when it comes to killing animals, and how it just really isn't a big deal. Killing, it comes easy to Clay Jordan. Really, if you get to thinking about it, using people in this game isn't everybody getting used in one way or another? That's the name of the game. Use everybody you can on your way to the top. Here we go. The circus is coming to town. The language is colorful and, more imaginative than like Brian or most other game-oriented castaways would use. But, the ethos, the pathos, the logos, yeah, that's all the same. Survivor Thailand is the logical end to Survivor as a social experiment. The last season where the show acts as if ethics supersede gameplay. And this season exemplifies what Sean said in that inaugural season about this contest has degenerated from a contest of who's the most deserving into a contest of who's least objectionable. And Ted echoes this exactly when he votes for Brian to win. You are the lesser of two evils. Evil wins. The good guys lose. Good guys don't always prevail. And, sometimes taking the easier but wrong path in a moral sense will get you further. This ain't no fairy tale bedtime storybook. It's fucking bleak. And in the first 4 seasons, we see people extrapolate a bigger meaning from their time out there. We see people using this as a time to really get to know themselves. We see people trying to play with some sense of an ethical code. Of course, this wasn't every character, but there was at least one person in each finale who seemed to want to get more out of Survivor than solely that $1 million check. Survivor Thailand, that's different. This is the first season where we get 2 finalists that are explicitly only in it for the money. 2 that are solely there because they want $1 million and will do anything to get it. They don't consider this real life, as Clay constantly reiterates. And you're not judged on your lying or your performance on this game as you are on life. This is a game, and we're here to play it the best we can and a win. And what separates this season from the seasons that come after it, the ones where this kind of attitude towards Survivor is encouraged and accepted, is that this season actually bothers to show why this attitude is a bad thing and why it is ethically dubious. After that final vote out and Clay and Brian are officially the final 2, we get these very eerie scenes shot at nighttime and night vision where they celebrate their successes in the game and they start to burn down camp in this blazing white flame. We started with the preacher, Clay says as he and Brian both evilly laugh, reminiscing about all the trails of bodies they left throughout the season. And how poetic. They killed the religious leader first. I mean, everybody has to be removed from the game to get down to the final 2. That's the way this game is played, and lying is part of this game. This is a game of people playing people. Who do you trust by looking them in the eye? Clay doesn't sugarcoat the evil of the game. He believes it is inherent to the game they are playing and highlights it. Someone pointed out to me a concept that is discussed as a TV trope called the unbuilt trope, which is where the first example of a trope isn't really a trope because there is no past precedent, where they are presented 3-dimensionally and realistically and oftentimes come off as a deconstruction of a trope, and I think Clay perfectly exemplifies this. Yes, Clay Jordan is the first person taken to the end to lose. In the previous 4 seasons, the final immunity winner loses to the person they choose to sit next to them at the end. And I think it's even fair to say that in a way, Clay was groomed and selected to be taken to the end by Brian. Because Brian also figured out his best odds at winning the final vote would be to sit next to Clay. But, hey, it goes both ways this time. Clay figured out his best odds were to sit next to Brian. Everybody respects Brian. He's a class act, but, Ted and Helen felt like they had a pretty solid base with old Brian, and they may feel more betrayed by him than me. Clay, he doesn't deserve to be listed among the goatiest of goats. Just look at the losing finalists in the seasons right after him. Look at every second runner-up of the Final 3 era. Clay got closer to winning than most castaways could ever dream of. And through the way Clay fits into the overall stories of Survivor Thailand, through his unique vernacular, through the interactions and reactions he inspires, through his incomparable personality, his quick, biting, dry wit, his crass but uniquely insightful thoughts on the game, and his impeccable sense of delivery, Clay Jordan is one of the greatest Survivor characters. Equal parts poignant and ridiculous. Happy we finally get him his due in an endgame, and I can only assume he will be 1 vote away from winning Rankdown 9 as well. I'm sure all 16 of us come up there definitely not wanting to be the first one kicked off. Well, somebody had to be the first one kicked off, and somebody's got to win the million. And it's just all the stuff in between these 2 people that's the problem. I wish all of us could be here to get $1 million, but we can't. it ends up with one person, one lone survivor, and I still got one more to beat.